Muito boa tarde. Terminamos o primeiro dia do Congresso com a entrevista sobre o tema Competências de Liderança para um Serviço Público de Alto Desempenho. Entrevista com Daniel Gerson, gestor de projetos de emprego e gestão pública da Organização para a Cooperação e Desenvolvimento Económico, OCDE. Passamos a palavra a Mariana Barbosa, jornalista do jornal Eco, que irá conduzir esta entrevista sobre o tema, e repito, Competências de Liderança para um Serviço Público de Alto Desempenho.
Olá, boa tarde. Hello, everyone. Daniel, are you there?
Yes.
We'll switch this to English because our guest is a multilingual guest. So, hi, Daniel, how are you?
I'm great. How are you? It's nice to be with you.
Yeah, we're okay here in Portugal, with sunny Portugal. So,
It's not sunny in Paris today.
I would like to invite you to give us some highlights about this study published today, so we can start from there.
Perfect. Yeah. When the INA invited me to participate in this, it was the perfect timing because we've actually launched, well, we published a new paper today. It's available on our iLibrary on leadership for a high-performing civil service. In fact, we will launch the paper officially in a week's time at an event that we're holding, an online event similar to this one. So those of you now in Portugal get a bit of a sneak preview of this paper, which you can download from the iLibrary already. And the paper is a summary of a project that we've been doing for the last couple of years with 10 of our OECD member countries, where we worked with these 10 countries to develop case studies on interesting leadership challenges inside their civil service. And we used those case studies to generate discussions and conversations around two main questions. The first question is, what kind of skills do leaders need in the public service, in the civil service? And to be clear, the word leader that I'm using here right now, we focus on these senior level public servants. So the people who are usually career civil servants, but at the higher levels of the hierarchy. We're not talking about elected officials. We're not talking about politicians and ministers in this report. So we asked, what skills do these people need? What are they using to really address the increasingly complex challenges that they're faced with on a day-to-day basis almost? And the second question that we asked is, what kind of policies need to be in place to actually make sure that these senior civil servants, these high-level public servants, have the skills not only to do their job, but also feel supported and have the opportunity, the right environment to do their job. So these two questions, one on what are the skills, and second on what's that policy framework to make sure that senior civil servants both have the skills and are able to use them in really effective ways.
Having the skills and having the tools to use that skills, right?
Right, and the sort of HR frameworks around that. So we looked at, how should senior civil servants be recruited, for example? How should they be trained and developed? Not only when they're in their leadership positions, but also the future civil servants who are going to take up these leadership positions. So there's a lot of emphasis on the pipeline, on building, making sure that people have the skills available before they're placed into these positions. And then how can they be supported while they're in place? How do we make sure that they're given the right tools, the right operating environment to do their job?
Which skills are these? What conclusions do you have with this study, with this paper?
So we looked at a lot of different contexts in a lot of different countries in a lot of different situations. We did workshops on leadership for innovation in a digital government. We did workshops on leadership for systems change, trying to work across horizontal silos. We did workshops on leadership for diversity and inclusion. And what was really interesting about all of these discussions and workshops that we did is that no matter what the theme is, no matter what the country is, the same skills, the same concepts keep coming up. And so we took all of these elements and we put them into 4 key capabilities that we're seeing these successful senior leaders use often. And I can talk about them quite quickly right now. And of course, if you want to know more, it's more fleshed out in the report. Mm-hmm. The 4 skills, the 4 capabilities kind of go, we've arranged them from internal to external. So the first one is looking at what we're calling values-based leadership. Mm-hmm. The public sector has values. There are very strong values that guide decision-making. And public service leaders need to be very aware of these values, and they need to be able to use them to guide their own internal decision-making, and of course to impart them through their organizations. But that's much easier said than done. Civil servants are faced with values dilemmas all the time. The values compete. There are many of them, right? Innovation sometimes competes with the value of stability. You know, the value of efficiency often competes with the value of inclusion. So there are trade-offs that decision makers need to make constantly, and there's tensions in these decisions.
And struggles always, all the time.
Struggles always, and it's really interesting to see, you know, when you place senior civil servants in a context of partnerships, partnerships with elected officials, because sometimes there's values clashes there, partnerships with communities which have certain values. Again, there can be really interesting value struggles, and we use the case study of the Netherlands as an example in this part of the report, where we looked at a number of senior civil servants who were trying to develop really interesting projects embedded in certain communities, working very closely with these communities, and often feeling like they were a bit stuck between the values of the community and the values of the elected officials who they are there officially to represent, as well as the values of the public service, which aren't always in sync in all these ways. So being a values-based leader is not a simple task, and it often requires a lot of challenging decisions and trade-offs. So that's sort of the first capability. Mm-hmm. The second one that we identified is, we're calling it open inclusion. So this is the ability to look around, to see who you're hearing from, to understand where you're getting your information from, but most importantly, to say, who am I not hearing from? And how do I search out different voices, both from within my workforce, from within the public, from within the communities, from different data sets, from different data sources, for example. And how do we make sure that we're creating an environment that has psychological safety around it, so that people who come from different backgrounds, who come from a different perspective, feel safe to bring forward their ideas, to challenge the assumptions that they see amongst them. This can be very challenging to really get to in public sectors. We did some very interesting work in Canada, where I am from, by the way. And with those senior civil servants, they are very, very aware of diversity and inclusion, because it's a very diverse country. But they still are also saying, you know, we are a bubble. Most public sectors are bubbles, right? Most ministries, you start at a young age, you work upwards, you start learning how to think in a certain way. And it can be quite challenging to really find those voices that push you to think differently. And we have all these internal biases, right, that push us to surround ourselves with people who reinforce our way of thinking. And so pushing people to really find those voices that challenge their internal assumptions, their internal perceptions, is not such an easy task to do. It actually goes against our human nature. But this is something that is essential to really build an understanding of the environments that we're working in and how the work of the public sector impacts people on a differentiated level. The third capability that we identified is really looking down into the organization. So we're talking about people who are at the top of their organizations usually, or within that group of senior leadership, and they tend to sometimes look amongst each other, hear from each other a lot. So it's a bit about this inclusion concept again. But what we're seeing more and more today is the need to build organizations that are fit for purpose for today. And that is a leadership objective, right? To build the organization of the future. This seems sort of obvious, it seems sort of clear, but it's surprising often how little senior civil servants genuinely accept that as their role. We did a survey a few years ago where we asked countries which of, what were the most important skill sets when they hire senior civil servants, and workforce development was one of the lowest ones. But it's counterintuitive because in fact, leaders can only achieve objectives through their workforce, through their organizations, right? Otherwise, it's not really leadership if they're just doing it themselves. So the ability to build skill sets in their organizations, to be able to delegate autonomy to different groups. And this is really changing significantly. I'm sure that today you've talked a lot about these emerging skill sets. You've probably talked a lot about digital skill sets. You've probably talked about innovation-oriented skill sets. I know that a colleague of mine will actually join the Congress on Friday and talk more about that work. But these all require senior civil servants who are able to attract these skill sets and bring them into their organizations, and not just bring them in and then leave them and let them sit in an old organization that doesn't know how to use them.
Retain them, yeah. Retain them.
Find a different way. Yeah, a different way of leading, a different way of using these skills. It's fundamental to this role. And so that we're calling organizational stewardship. And the last skill set that we've identified is one looking outwards to all of the other kinds of organizations and partnerships. It's using systems thinking, networks, collaboration. Used to be that senior civil servants were very unknown. Nobody really knew who they were. They were these sort of dark, gray forces, somewhere between the elected officials that had this big public presence and the services that were delivered by front-facing civil servants. But today, that's no longer the case. Today, we have senior civil servants who have to be out in the communities, who have to be working with an increasingly diverse range of partners. And they're using tools like social media. It's totally changing the way that they interact with their main stakeholders, and their stakeholders are changing too. And so this really requires a way of thinking about entire systems, knowing who the other actors are, how to connect with them, and how to motivate collaborations in that space.
Good, thank you. Meanwhile, we had a pandemic situation, so we had to rethink, rebuild, reconnect all the points in this equation, right?
Yes.
So what are the main challenges or the main differences you see right now, and what were and what is the main challenge to fight for now, right now in this kind of ecosystem?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question because different countries are experiencing well, they're all experiencing the same pandemic, but in different ways. And I've been, we don't have any data, we don't have any science on this yet, of course, but but I've been having a lot of interesting conversations with people that we've been working with on these themes around these questions. And one of the interesting debates is, does the pandemic, does crisis, global crisis, does this change the leadership skills and competencies of an effective public service? Or does it make it even more important to have good leadership and sort of magnify the differences between the good and the less good?
Mm-hmm. Amplificate the differences between both of them, right?
Right,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Many people I've talked to feel like it's more that one. But I think what's really, really special about this experience is that leaders everywhere have, there's two things. One is that leaders everywhere have imperfect information to work with. And of course, we've talked a lot about evidence-based policy making and using the data and developing, deeper insights so that we can be more informed and aware. But nowadays, in this moment, people have had to make very quick decisions in situations that are changing day by day. Our understanding of the pandemic is changing day by day. Our understanding of what works today is different than what works yesterday. So that has been profoundly a shift, I think, in many of the processes. And in a lot of ways, we've had to change the decision-making processes. And that leads me to my second point, is that decision-making now happens much more quickly in a far more decentralized kind of way as a result of this pandemic. And one of the things that is inspiring is that we've seen civil servants of all levels, not just the ones at the top of the hierarchy, but all over the place, jumping up and saying, wait, I have an idea, I have a way of solving some of these issues. And in a lot of cases, the civil servants that we've been talking to have been able to all of a sudden generate their own leadership, bring a leadership forward from the bottom, from the left, from the right, from outside the public sector in, from under the leaders, up. And they've been able to do this because the sense of urgency also has created a moment where we have reduced, in some cases, all of the different levels of bureaucracy, all of the different levels of requirement for approvals and this process-oriented stuff that public sector agencies love to put in place. And we know why they put it in place. Sometimes it's for very important reasons. But I think there's a really exciting opportunity as we progress in our maturity of managing this pandemic to look backwards and ask ourselves whether all of those layers of oversight, of bureaucracy that have been impinging on leadership from below, they're all necessary in whatever normal we find ourselves coming to as the pandemic is behind us.
Is there any chance to forget the people in this process of simplification of the processes?
To forget the people? Which people do you mean?
People needs the workforce, the people that are involved in the process.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think that to reiterate one of the points I made earlier, leadership is all about people, right? It's all about achieving your objectives through other people. And so, in fact, when we define leadership in the report, we said that it's two things. It's moving something forward, moving something somewhere through other people, right? So there has to be a sense of change, and there has to be a sense of working in relationships with other people. So we can't lose sight of people, right? I mean, otherwise it's not leadership. It's just management or other things. We also have to remember that in so many ways, public employees are heroes in this crisis, right? They have been working tirelessly behind the scenes and in front of the scenes to keep people healthy, to keep people safe, to make sure that services are still being delivered in totally transformed ways. So we should not lose sight of the people. There is a risk, of course. Then there's a big risk that when it comes, when we start doing the budgeting process and see how much this has cost, and that we also forget about the people. But we have to keep this in mind, and we have to remember that highly capable civil servants are what gets us through moments like these.
Mm-hmm. You talked about the situation that describes like starting again a process, starting from scratch, so building something new. What will be the most important tips to do this, to start building a different leadership in these services, in these realities?
Well, I don't think we need to build something new completely. I mean, there's always new, right? I mean, everything is changing constantly. And so, and the public sector is not immune from that. And I'm sure that everybody listening to this will recognize all of this change that happens more and more frequently. But I really think that there are so many learning opportunities coming out of this crisis. There are so many moments that we need to stop and reflect. I did an interesting panel discussion at a similar event in Ireland recently, and one of the heads of one of the agencies said that she's sitting down now with all of her employees and asking them, if we had known that this was coming, what would we have done differently? How would we have organized ourselves if we had 6 months to plan for this?
To prepare this, yes. To
prepare, yeah, exactly. Exactly. What would we have already had in place? How would we have been able to structure the work differently, right? And I think that this is a really useful potential starting point for this kind of reflection, so that we make sure that we're learning and we're coming out of this stronger, that we're using this as a point to pivot. Nobody that I've talked to thinks that the post-pandemic reality is going to be the same as the pre-pandemic. And a lot of the people I've talked to are quite optimistic that coming out of this, there will be more flexible working arrangements for public employees, better use of new digital tools at the heart of organizations. But that's just a starting point, right? So, and perhaps there'll be a whole new world of people who are inspired to take up roles in the public service and be public leaders, if we can use this as a moment to also rebrand the public service, to emphasize its value in society, which sometimes gets lost in sort of the local narratives.
As we are, most of us are at home, working from home, and moving from the center of the cities to other parts of the countries. It is interesting to think about own leadership. I mean, I am my own leader, and I have my community, and I have my impact, and I grow in my responsibility to be a leader also, as my leader is. Is that interesting for you to talk about it?
Absolutely. And so we focused on these senior level leaders in our project, but I think one of the biggest sort of important points about public leadership in general, but it really comes home in the public sector, is that no leader can know everything. No leader can be all powerful and all knowing, and they have to surround themselves with good people. They have to have good people everywhere. And this means that you kind of turn leadership on its head. The leader should be there to empower all of the other people in their organization to lead themselves, so to speak. This requires an ability to delegate, to delegate not just tasks, but to delegate autonomy, to delegate accountability, it's very hard to do sometimes in the public sector because we work in such transparent ways, in such political ways. Mm-hmm. So it's not an easy task, but it's even more important in the public sector to get it right, even though it's more hard. And so I do think that the idea that, you know, leadership is distributed, leadership has to come from all parts of the public service is incredibly powerful, and shouldn't just be focused on those senior civil servants, even though that is the focus, admittedly, of our report.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that's all. Thank you, Daniel, for your sharings and for sharing with us all these ideas and the paper. So
thank you. I will send a link to the paper, and perhaps that can be shared on the website or something like that. It was literally published today, so I'm very happy to have this opportunity to speak with you about it. And I wish you all the best in the next 2 days of your Congress. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel Gerson. We would like to thank you because we gave us this enlightenment for this this theme of the leadership for a high-performance public service. Many people asked for the link where they can find the document. Is it possible to write it down in the chat? Because
yeah, I can do it right away. Let me just.
And then it will.
It's the Q&A part. If you
yeah.
You see it.
Yeah, I've got it here. So in the Q&A.
It will be lovely.
What do I do?
Then we'll put it in our website or in our social medias, and for everyone to be possible to read it.
Chat function, because my
it's not in the chat function, it's the Q&A. I
yeah.
don't know if you have that option. Okay.
Yes.
I can post it in the Q&A part. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, sorry, because I only see the questions and it gives me an opportunity to answer them, but I don't see.
Okay, we already have it here, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll put it to everyone.
Okay.
Sorry. So now everyone can see it. Okay, so everyone can access the document, and we'll put it in our website and in the social media. So I will now going to speak in Portuguese. Sorry, Daniel. So, obrigada a todos que nos acompanharam neste primeiro dia. Aproveitamos para lembrar que amanhã o Congresso Nacional da Administração Pública será dedicado ao tema do desenvolvimento e transferência de conhecimento e às interconexões entre o ensino superior, a formação profissional e o trabalho. Vamos começar o dia com uma entrevista ao Sr. Secretário de Estado Adjunto do Trabalho e da Formação Profissional, Miguel Cabrita, a qual se seguirá uma mesa redonda sobre os novos contextos da aprendizagem na administração pública. Já na parte da tarde vamos ter espaço para uma entrevista ao Sr. Secretário de Estado da Ciência, Tecnologia e Ensino Superior, João Sobrinho Teixeira, e uma mesa redonda dedicada à investigação e transferência de conhecimento. O programa está completo e está disponível no site e nas redes sociais do INA, onde também pode formalizar a sua inscrição e obter o acesso a estas sessões. Contamos consigo, obrigada e até amanhã. Thank you so much once again. Thank you so much for this interview, and see you next time. Thank you so much.
Obrigada.
Obrigada.